Welcome to part 2 of my 3-part series, where I will be scaling the Verse and Dimensions wiki. In this part, I will be covering everything past the Omniverse, all the way up to the highest conventional structure of the Verse and Dimensions wiki. If you want an explanation of everything before the Omniverse, you should watch my video The True Scale of Hyperman. Firstly, I would like to say something about my previous Hyperman scaling. There is another interpretation of Hyperman's scale that I didn't mention in my previous video. My scale of Hyperman hinged on my interpretation that every subcont level is only ever a finite amount of dimensions higher than the previous one, and while there are arguments that would support that interpretation, another one is possible. You could also say that every subcount archverse fully transcends the previous one and therefore always has to correspond to a higher cardinal number. That changes Hyperman's scaling. Since a universe can be Aleph one-dimensional, the multiverse containing it would be Aleph two-dimensional, and the megaverse containing that would be Aleph three-dimensional. Since the Omniverse has a subcount index of omega, that would put Hyperman at outerversal. Now that we have covered what I missed about Hyperman, we can continue with the rest of Verse and Dimensions. Like I've said in my previous video, the Omniverse, and therefore Hyperman, Creator and Destroyer scale one layer into low outerversal, or with the other interpretation outerversal plus. All of those characters, the Omniverse and the Godverses, are contained within the local monocosm, called the barrel. The barrel has a subcount index of omega plus 1 and is contained within Beyond. Beyond has a subcount index of omega plus 2 and is home to the so-called Super God Council. The Super God Council watches over and creates every creator and destroyer within Beyond. From a writing perspective, they are some of the most interesting characters from the Verse and Dimensions wiki, and their articles and stories are definitely worth checking out. But from a power scaling perspective, they are sadly not that impressive. Hyperman's alternate version, who with the help of the Eternal Legion, was able to create a monocosm with an infinite number of omniverse. This is still a low outerversal or outerversal feat, depending on the interpretation. This Hyperman was able to affect a member of the Super God Council. And even though this member eventually defeated him, it shows that Hyperman and the Super God Council exist on the same tier. This interaction is also my argument for placing Hyperman at low 1A. If subcount archverses did transcend each other like they would have to make Hyperman a 1A plus character, then why was alternate Hyperman able to affect a being existing on a higher subcount level than him? For me, this seems more like the kind of transcendence you would get from having one more dimension, meaning that every higher subcount archverse only transcends the lower by a finite amount of dimensions, even if their dimensionality is already infinite. But even I must say that this is rather weak proof for placing Hyperman at low outerversal, so the other interpretation, which is definitely more intuitive, should also be counted as a valid possibility. There are many other characters on the same tier as Hyperman, like Ven Rensselaer, the Guardian of the Fifth Wall, the Higher Guardian, etc., but I don't want to make this video 1 hour long, so I'll jump straight to the next noteworthy character. The External Hazard are a group of extradimensional invaders. The strongest beings in their ranks, the Stage 1 Seeds, are capable of fighting on par with the combined might of the Super God Council. Their origin is a being called Naija, an entity that views the Stage 1 Seeds as nothing but its own thoughts. So it views even outerversal entities as nothing but thoughts, placing it very high into outerversal. Maybe even high outerversal. From here the scaling of Verse and Dimensions goes from pretty strong to absolutely insane. But to understand why, I need to explain the concept of card verses. On the wiki, they are described as a type of verse, whose subcount index corresponds to a cardinal number. That means any cardinal number you can think of has a corresponding verse. So the Omniverse would be the Aleph null card verse, but there are also verses corresponding to the inaccessible cardinal, Malo cardinals, and even larger numbers within the large cardinal hierarchy. All the card verses are contained by the Barrelplex, so the Barrelplex contains the entire large cardinal hierarchy and by extension all of mathematics, putting it at the peak of the tiering system. The Aspect Lords are able to manipulate the Barrelplex and other verses on its level, putting them at the pinnacle of the tiering system as well. Beyond the Barrelplex are the self-verses. They are so large, that they are, paradoxically, larger than themselves. The difference between the first self-verse and the Barrelplex is larger than the difference between the Barrelplex and a subatomic particle within our universe. This would put the first self-verse at baseline beyond tiering. The rule breaker is capable of existing on this level, being able to manipulate at least a significant part of the first self-verse. The infinite madness and the eternal defiance are above the rule breaker. But they haven't shown any feats that would put them above the first self-verse, thus placing the three of them at baseline beyond tiering. Beyond that, there are currently no real entities, but the cosmology of verse and dimensions still goes on. Beyond the first self-verse there are even larger self-verses, each surpassing the last in the same way the first self-verse surpasses the Barrelplex. This hierarchy of self-verses should function the same way as the arch-verses, meaning that however big a self-verse is, there can always be one that is even bigger. And that brings us to the largest conventional structure within verse and dimensions, the mayaverse. The mayaverse contains all self-verses, no matter how high on the hierarchy, and since this hierarchy has an immeasurable number of levels, this would place the mayaverse at immeasurable layers beyond the tiering system. For the next video, I will be looking at hypercosmology and showcase what I believe is the largest thing ever conceived. Thanks for watching, and I promise that the next video will not take 2 months.